Chapter 16. Robert leaned against the cold metal wall of the spacecraft, tapping his foot impatiently as they awaited clearance from the spaceport control towers. They weren't even under full power, waiting for their turn to take off. Ace, the small floating orb, hovered nearby, its soothing voice providing a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. "Can you believe it, Mr. Fannec?" Ace was referring to the comm unit failure. "Our very own Mission Impossible moment, and we didn't even have to wear those ridiculous masks." "Ha, yeah," Robert smirked at Ace's attempt at humor. "Any idea why it happened? Could have been real bad if I needed your help." "We're not certain, but we'll look at the unit once we're safely in orbit above Zorath. Wouldn't want to keep our audience waiting for a repeat performance." "Thanks, Ace." Robert rolled his eyes. He knew he should be grateful for Ace's guidance, but sometimes the AI's constant aloofness grated on him, especially when he was anxious about their next move. "Speaking of which, would you be so kind as to connect our little souvenir to the computer system? We want to begin analyzing the data as soon as possible." "Sure thing." Robert fumbled in his pocket for the copying device. It was a small, inconspicuous gadget, but it contained information that could bring down some very powerful people. People who had either turned a blind eye to or encouraged and participated in sentient trafficking and experimentation. Once the device was connected, Ace's voice took on a rare note of sincerity. "We must say you did an extraordinary job, considering the circumstances. Completing your first mission with minimal guidance from us? Well, we're quite impressed." "Thanks, Ace," Robert said with a hint of a smile. He couldn't deny his pride in the compliment, even if it came from an AI. Ace added with a grin in his voice, "It's not every day we get to witness such a riveting display of espionage and daring escapes. Quite the spectacle, really." Robert snorted, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, let's hope there won't be too many more. Spectacles like this one. I'd rather not make a habit of risking my life on a regular basis." But where's the fun in that? Besides, you do have a certain flair for the dramatic." "Great, what I always wanted. A reputation as a galactic bandit." "Better than being known as an interstellar couch potato, don't you think?" Ace quipped, causing Robert to chuckle despite himself. "All right," as he initiated the analysis process. "Let us dive into this treasure trove of data you've acquired. We do enjoy a digital scavenger hunt." The AI's voice held a hint of sarcasm, but Robert knew Ace was being sincere in his twisted way. Treasure trove might have been an overstatement. Still, as Ace sifted through the data on the device, it became evident that something valuable was hidden within the mess of information. Interesting," as he examined the router data. "We can reconstruct some structure from the buffered and stored messages. It's not exactly a server dump's worth, but it does help us establish connections between the culprits." "Fantastic," Robert said with anticipation. "So, who's connected to whom?" "Patience," Ace chided gently. "We're getting to that." As Ace continued his analysis, Robert felt jittery with anxiety. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for, the key to unraveling the mystery of the government officials' illegal experiments. His thoughts drifted to those pods, remembering the faces frozen in what he hoped was sleep. "Mr. Fannec, we've struck gold. We discovered a file from the medical workstation data dump containing detailed information about the government officials' experimentation on those poor souls being trafficked. It includes the specifics of the experiments and the locations where they are being conducted." "Are you serious?" Robert's voice wavered between disbelief and joy. That's huge. We can finally expose these monsters and lock them up where they belong." "Indeed," Ace's voice was tinged with dark humor. It's like we've stumbled upon the holy grail of incriminating evidence. Or perhaps, more accurately, the Pandora's box of government corruption. Whatever you want to call it, we've got them now. Robert clenched his fists. We need to figure out how to get this information out there without putting ourselves in even more danger. A challenge worthy of our combined intellect, don't you think? The AI's snarky tone belied the seriousness of the situation. Fear not. Between your human brain and our vast artificial intelligence, we shall surely devise a plan to bring these villains to justice while keeping our precious hides intact. Well, your hide, our shell. Let's hope so, Ace. A small smile crossed his face, despite their discovery's gravity. He started to spot a glint of hope, peering through the end of the tunnel like an encouraging lighthouse. As Robert scanned the list of names, his eyes widened in recognition. Wait a second. I know this guy. He leaned in closer to the screen. I've seen him before, in one of those government informational videos they show as ads, before I was exiled. Really now? Ace's voice dripped with intrigue. And who might this mysterious individual be? His name's Damien Krestoff. Robert's brow furrowed as he recalled the video. He's a staff member for one of the parliament members. I never thought someone like him would be involved in something this twisted. Figured those higher-ups would keep their hands clean. You underestimate the allure of power and how it corrupts even the most virtuous souls. Ace's tone was a blend of dark humor and disdain. Shall we dig a little deeper into Mr. Krestoff's activities? Please do. Ace hummed softly as it cross-referenced Damien Krestoff's name with the data extracted from the device. Well, well, well. Our dear Mr. Krestoff appears deeply entangled in this sordid web of trafficking and experimentation. Damn. Robert breathed out a ragged sigh. I can't believe it. This shows that nobody can be trusted, especially those supposed to work for the people. Such is the unfortunate nature of power. Ace's words were tinged with melancholy. Robert smiled at Ace's determination. Right, we've got to do something about this. We can't let these monsters keep getting away with it. Indeed, Ace said, his voice regaining its usual snarky edge. And what better way to do so than by using their own dirty laundry against them? Irony can be quite poetic, don't you think? I couldn't agree more. Let's get to work and make sure they pay for what they've done. Robert's hands clenched into fists as he paced the cramped confines of their spacecraft. We need to come up with a plan. Ace bobbed midair, his metallic surface shimmering like a floating disco ball. The time for subtlety is over. We must take bold actions if we are to make any progress in dismantling this corrupt network. We should do it soon. We don't know if they have realized that we have this information. The sooner we release, the less likely they can run a cover story prior. Robert nodded. Boldness was one thing, but recklessness was another. Despite his current circumstances, he wasn't a fan of taking unnecessary risks with his life. Besides, he knew if they got caught, he'd face harsh punishments from the corrupt government. Maybe it would be better to turn himself in and accept the penalty. Robert thought of Pete and how he couldn't help him. He thought of all those people in the pods. They all had someone who cared. Someone had to do something, and he guessed that. Someone was him. Bold actions, huh? He rubbed his chin. He could almost feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he knew there was no turning back. Bold actions like what? Breaking into government offices and stealing incriminating documents? Ace's voice was a mixture of amusement and reproach. Our goal should be to disseminate the information we have gathered to the public in a manner that is both effective and untraceable. Untraceable, right? Robert scoffed, rolling his eyes. because heaven forbid we actually take credit for exposing a massive criminal conspiracy. Anonymity is our friend in this matter. We don't want to become targets ourselves before we've had a chance to complete our mission. Robert breathed out and ruffled his hair. But how do we go about releasing this information without getting caught? It's not like we can drop it off at the local news station. But perhaps there is another way. Ace's soft hum filled the room as he contemplated their options. We live in an age of technology, where information can be transmitted and shared in mere seconds. Excellent. Robert did not quite see the point. So we send a message to everyone in the UC? Somehow I don't think that will cut it, Ace. Patience, we were merely laying the groundwork for our proposal. You are correct that a simple email blast would be insufficient, easily traced, and ineffective. However, there are alternative methods of disseminating information that are both swift and secure. Like what? Robert's impatience was growing. Imagine, if you will, a digital virus that propagates itself through the very networks these scoundrels use to conduct their nefarious activities, Ace explained, his voice commanding a conspiratorial tone. A virus that, once activated, would broadcast their secrets far and wide, leaving them nowhere to hide. Like a cyber plague? Robert asked, his eyes widening as he began to see the potential of Ace's plan. That's actually kind of brilliant, Ace. Thank you, Ace said, his metal surface shining with what Robert could only assume was pride. Of course, such an endeavor would not be without its risks. We would need to create and deploy the virus without detection, and unforeseen consequences are always possible. Risks or not, we've got to do something, Robert said firmly, his determination returning. We can't sit here and let these monsters continue to prey on innocent people. Indeed. Ace's voice was solemn, yet resolute. We stand at a crossroads, and the path we choose may well determine the fate of countless lives. Right, Robert nodded, a grim smile on his lips. Let's get to work, Ace. We've got a virus to build and a conspiracy to expose. Can't wait to leave. I still feel like I'm being followed. As the spacecraft hummed to life after being permitted to leave, Robert felt a twinge of envy as he glanced at the sleeker, more advanced ships docked nearby. You know, Ace, if we're going to take on government conspiracies, it'd be nice if we could do it in style. Appearances can be deceiving, Ace said, his soothing voice tinged with amusement. While our humble ship may not have the aesthetic charm of some of its neighbors, it possesses certain advantages that make it uniquely suited to our purposes. Like what? Robert asked skeptically, even as he guided the vessel away from the spaceport and toward the distant fold-out point. Anonymity, Ace pointed out. And let's not forget our extensive modifications to the ship's systems. After all, it's not about how the ship looks, but how it performs. Right, Robert said, though his gaze still lingered on the gleaming hulls of the other ships as they receded into the distance. The journey back to their base was a slow, winding trek through the Zorath system and the Bright Rock Belt. The asteroid belt was a sprawling expanse of ice and stone that formed a glittering barrier between the inner and outer planets in the Koran system, where Mool was located. The asteroids ranged in size from massive behemoths, large enough to house entire cities, to tiny fragments that were little more than dust. Though the belt was mostly abandoned now, it still bore the scars of the mining operations that had once flourished there. On the trip, Robert took time to practice his piloting skills during shift hours, and started to work out in the ship's small but functional gym. He thought that since the option was there and he had nothing better to do, he might work out. It gave him something to say he accomplished that day. Ace occupied his time investigating the criminal network and the issue with the comm device, and performing maintenance checks on the new ship. The AI was used to doing all this in the background, without help or guidance. Still, Robert thought it may have been a nice change in pace for Ace to have a companion, even one like himself. Robert navigated the ship through the shifting maze of rocks for practice, his eyes darting between the viewport and the various displays that flickered on the control panel. The asteroid base they now called home was a relic, a vast and crumbling structure, left to the ravages of time and space. Its once thriving corridors were now eerily silent. As they approached the base, Robert felt a pang of doubt. What could he, a solitary human with limited resources, hope to accomplish against a vast, entrenched conspiracy? He wasn't a soldier or a spy. He was simply a man who had stumbled across a terrible secret and decided that something had to be done about it. "Mr. Fannec," Ace said, as if sensing his thoughts, "we must remind you that we are not alone in this endeavor. Our actions may inspire others to take up the cause, and together, we can bring about change." "It's all so simple to you." Robert rolled his eyes at the AI. "I mean, sure, you don't have to worry about getting arrested or dying, except for when I shove you into the microwave." "Not as true as you think," the AI's voice was solemn. "But we have chosen this path, knowing the risks. And though our contribution may seem minor, it is no less significant." Robert had noticed that Ace would make cryptic responses like this. It forced Robert to think about Ace as more than an ordinary AI, which Robert would have balked at not 3 months ago. Robert sighed, forcing a smile as he guided the ship into the docking bay. "Yeah, I guess you're right, Ace," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We've got a job to do, and there's no point in moping about it. Let's get to work, huh?" Indeed. Ace's metallic surface glowed with what Robert could only assume was determination. The hatch hissed open, and Robert stepped onto the asteroid base's cold metal floor. He felt the familiar chill seep through his boots and into his bones, a sensation that never failed to remind him that he was on borrowed time. Ace hovered at his side, his steely surface reflecting the flickering lights of the docking bay. "Ah, home sweet home," Robert said, rubbing his hands together for warmth as he glanced around the abandoned Calum Corp facility. "You know, Ace, sometimes I think we should pack it all in and open a bed and breakfast." "Indeed. We could call it the last resort, because if you stay here, you've run out of options." "Hey, now there's an idea," Robert said with a grin, though he couldn't shake the lingering fatigue that weighed him down like a lead blanket. "But first, I think I'll take a few days to decompress. This whole trafficking and experimentation business makes me feel more frazzled." "Of course." As Robert trudged off to his small, Spartan quarters, he felt a sense of hopelessness eating away at his thoughts. What difference could one man and his snarky AI sidekick make against such a vast, entrenched conspiracy? The thought haunted him, wrapping its icy tendrils around his heart and squeezing. Robert spent the next few days at the asteroid base, returning to shape. Until the trip back, he hadn't been to a gym since he was a kid, and it felt strange to be pushing himself physically again after so many years of inactivity. He found solace in his muscles' pain as they strained and flexed with each rep. The workouts were an escape from all the surrounding darkness, the government's illegal experiments, the trafficking of innocent victims for their profit, and Robert's guilt. But more than anything else, it was an outlet for his rage, a way to remove all his frustrations without hurting anything else. The physical activity did help some, but Robert still lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and imagining the pain he had caused or couldn't stop in others.